The automatic doors slid open with a quiet whoosh, letting in a gust of warm summer air as an elderly black veteran stepped into the bright, air-conditioned store. His cane tapped softly against the polished tile floor, his worn-out military cap sitting proudly on his head, a quiet badge of honor for the years he had served his country. He wasn't looking for trouble. He never did. All he wanted was to pick up a few essentials and go about his day. But trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding people like him. The moment he entered, the store manager's eyes locked onto him. She stood behind the counter, arms crossed, lips pursed, watching him with the kind of look that made it clear he wasn't welcome. Maybe it was his old faded jacket. Maybe it was the way he moved, slow and deliberate, with the weight of years on his shoulders. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something else entirely. The veteran, unaware of the storm brewing, took his time browsing the aisles. He moved carefully, his cane steadying each step, his fingers grazing the shelves as he looked for what he needed. But before he could even grab a single item, the manager was already marching toward him, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice laced with something that wasn't quite politeness. "I think you need to leave." The veteran blinked, confused. "I'm sorry. We don't allow loitering in here," she said, folding her arms tighter. "And we definitely don't tolerate panhandling." The words hit him like a slap. He straightened, his grip tightening around his cane. "Ma'am, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just shopping." But the manager wasn't having it. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security." A heavy silence fell between them. Shoppers nearby had started to take notice, their eyes darting between the two. Some looked away, pretending not to see. Others whispered, among themselves. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, a voice cut through the tension. A voice so rich, so deep, that it made the entire store go still. "Is there a problem here?" The manager froze. Her expression shifted, the confidence in her stance wavering. Because that voice, she knew that voice. Everyone did. Slowly she turned, and there, standing just a few feet away, watching everything unfold, was none other than Morgan Freeman. The air in the store shifted. It was that kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that made people hold their breath without realizing it. The manager's face, once full of authority, paled as she fully turned to face the man who had just spoken. Morgan Freeman. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Nobody did. The veteran, still gripping his cane, blinked in surprise. He wasn't expecting backup, especially not from one of the most recognizable voices in the world. "I asked." Morgan Freeman said again, his voice calm but firm. "Is there a problem here?" The manager's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around as if hoping someone else would step in. But the other employees were suddenly very interested in their work, avoiding her gaze. The customers, however, were staring. Some had even taken out their phones, already recording, waiting to see how this was going to play out. "No, Mr. Freeman," the manager finally stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. "There's no problem at all." Morgan Freeman raised an eyebrow, the kind of expression that said he wasn't buying it. He turned to the veteran, his deep brown eyes full of quiet understanding. "Sir?" he said. "Is that true?" The veteran hesitated. He was a man who had seen his fair share of battles, both on the battlefield and off. He had learned to pick which ones were worth fighting. But there was something about the way Morgan Freeman looked at him, something that made him feel seen, in a way he hadn't in a long time. "No," the veteran said, his voice steady. "There is a problem." A murmur rippled through the small crowd gathering near the checkout. The manager's face tightened. "Sir?" she said, directing her, Attention back to Freeman now, her tone shifting, trying to sound pleasant. This gentleman was, I heard, Morgan Freeman interrupted, his voice smooth but edged with something undeniable, authority. The manager faltered. This man, Freeman continued, gesturing toward the veteran, served this country, and you were about to throw him out as if he were nothing. The words hung in the air. A few people nodded. Others whispered. A younger employee, standing near the bakery section, shifted uncomfortably. That's not what I meant, the manager started, her voice rising slightly. But she was losing ground, and she knew it. Then what did you mean? Freeman asked, his voice even, giving her a chance to own up to her actions. She glanced around again, realizing how many people were watching, how many cameras were rolling. I thought, she fumbled for words, her face turning red. You thought what? Freeman pressed. His voice wasn't angry, but it carried something heavier than anger. Disappointment. The veteran, standing quietly all this time, took a deep breath. It happens all the time, he said, not to Freeman, not even to the manager, but more to himself, like he was tired of saying it, tired of living it. People see me, and they assume things. A young woman, probably in her 20s, stepped forward from the crowd. Sir, she said softly, looking at the veteran, can I ask what branch you served in? The veteran studied her for a moment, then nodded. Army, he said. Vietnam. A hush fell over the group. Even the manager looked taken aback, as if she hadn't expected that answer. My granddad served in Vietnam, the young woman said, smiling a little. Thank you for your service. A few other voices echoed the sentiment, murmurs of appreciation, spreading through the store. The veteran nodded, but didn't say much. He had never been the type to seek recognition. Morgan Freeman, still standing beside him, looked back at the manager. It's one thing to make a mistake, he said, his voice quiet now, but still carrying weight. It's another to refuse to learn from it. The manager swallowed hard. Her confidence had crumbled. She knew she had messed up. The only question now was what she would do about it. The tension in the air was thick. The cameras were still, rolling. The moment of truth had arrived. Would she try to defend herself? Would she apologize? The entire store was waiting, and then the manager stood there, her lips pressed together so tightly, they turned pale. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, the judgment in the air thick enough to touch. The entire store was watching, waiting. The veteran stood tall despite his years, his cane steady, his dignity unshaken. Morgan Freeman's gaze never wavered, quiet but powerful, leaving no room for excuses. For a second, the manager looked like she wanted to argue, to find some way to justify what she had done. But then, as she glanced at the cameras pointed at her, at the faces of customers, staring in quiet disapproval, something changed in her expression. It wasn't quite regret, not yet, but it was realization. She took a slow breath and swallowed her pride. I was wrong, she said finally, her voice quieter now. Sir, I shouldn't have treated you that way. The veteran studied her for a moment. He had heard half-hearted apologies before, the kind people gave just to move on. But there was something different in her tone this time. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I misjudged you, she continued, and I'm sorry. The veteran nodded, his face unreadable, but his posture relaxed just a little. Morgan Freeman gave a slow, approving nod. Acknowledging our mistakes, he said, his voice smooth as ever, is the first step toward change. A small murmur rippled through the crowd. The tension that had held the room so tightly finally began to loosen. The younger employee from earlier hesitated before stepping forward. Sir? she said to the veteran, her voice nervous but sincere. "If there's anything you need today, it's on the house. Our way of saying thank you." The veteran blinked, clearly not expecting that. "I appreciate it," he said, his voice steady, "but I can pay for my own groceries." A few people chuckled softly. There was strength in his words, in his refusal to be seen as anything other than self-sufficient. Morgan Freeman placed a hand gently on the veteran's shoulder. "Then let's get you what you came here for," he said. The store slowly returned to normal, but there was a shift in the air, a lesson left behind. People had witnessed something important, a reminder of respect, of dignity, of second chances. The veteran finished his shopping, walking a little taller now, not because of the cameras or the attention, but because he had stood his ground and been heard. As he made his way to the register, Morgan Freeman walked beside him, offering quiet conversation, a rare moment between two men who had lived long enough to understand the weight of moments like these. And as the automatic doors whooshed open once more, letting in the warm summer air, the veteran stepped out, his head held high, knowing that today, just maybe, the world had learned something. Morgan Freeman watched him go, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. Then, with a final glance back at the store, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the world as quietly as he had arrived, leaving behind nothing but his words, his presence, and a lesson not easily forgotten. And just like that, the moment passed. But the impact, that would last much longer.